Bethesda family, hello again. Let me start this Ecclesiastes devotional with a brief review. In his book titled Ecclesiastes Through New Eyes, Jeffrey Myers writes these words, quote, "Do not be surprised to find yourself in a frustrating situation from which you cannot escape by means of controlling it. Not everything can be fixed. Not everything is a problem to be solved. Some things must be suffered and endured. Wisdom does not teach us how to master the world. It does not give us techniques for programming life such that life becomes orderly and predictable." End quote. Those words summarize so well Ecclesiastes 1. And so far, we have learned three things. Number one, we have limits to what we can control. We can change the food we eat for breakfast, but we can't begin to change the mysteries of life, let alone understand them. Number two, life in and of itself can't give ultimate satisfaction, but that reality doesn't stop us from trying to make it so. And number three, wisdom is limited. As Myers says, wisdom does not teach us how to master the world. So for these three reasons, we are limited, life is limited, wisdom is limited, we find ourselves in all sorts of frustrating situations that remove our joy. And I think whatever these situations turn out to be, a difficult job or marriage, disagreements with friends or neighbors we don't get along with, something that we really want to happen that doesn't, kind of that unsteadiness all of us feel through life, or maybe the frustration that we know now because of this virus, these frustrating situations spark in us sinful tendencies to want to make life more predictable and orderly than we can. And again, so that we can be happy. This desire for happiness and a predictable life is the gist of Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So let's camp out there for a little while. And for the moment, let's focus on just three verses, verses 1, 4, and 5. In verse 1, the preacher writes, "I said in my heart, 'Come now, and I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself.'" So we see that his end game is pleasure and joy. How does he determine to get there? That's verses 4 and 5. In verses 4 and 5, he tells us, "I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees." So he set out to transform his environment. In other words, he set out to make his environment predictable, to give it some order, in order again to make him happy. Here's a bit of application. His approach is similar to ours when we portray snippets of our lives on Facebook or Instagram. If we're not careful on these platforms, the words we use and the pictures we post pretend that we have mastered life, which we have already learned from Ecclesiastes is impossible. And notice two things from these verses. See if they feel familiar in your experience. Number one, notice the selfishness in these verses. He writes, "I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks." He's leveraging resources for his own happiness, his happiness alone. What these verses do is uncover an ugly consumerism that is inappropriate for Christians who are called to relate to others not with the attitude of "what can I get from you?" rather, "what can I give to you?" Later on in the chapter, he tells us that the result of this selfish pursuit is nothing more than vanity and a striving after wind. It's empty. It doesn't work. And notice this also. Number two, notice the superhuman effort required to achieve this predictability and orderliness to life. Again, he writes, his great works, and they include what? Houses, vineyards, gardens, parks, and fruit trees. These nouns are all in the plural. Not one house, but many. Not one garden, but many. Imagine the time and the effort and the energy necessary to achieve all this. That's why we call it superhuman. And notice something else that's instructive. The word parks, that comes from a word that means paradise. And when we read that in these parks, he plants all different kinds of fruit trees, we certainly should not miss the allusion back to Genesis chapter 1. What is he trying to do? He's trying to recreate the Garden of Eden. He's trying to fabricate his own paradise. But even this results in no happiness. And in summary, what we learn is that a selfish, superhuman effort won't produce joy. So let me encourage you. Take steps to make sure that a selfishness or a seemingly superhuman effort does not characterize your use of social media. The following question then is necessary. So, is joy possible? And for that answer, we have to look at two more verses. These are verses 24 and 25. There he writes, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment?" So the writer tells us that joy is possible, but God has to give it, or there is none. God's good gifts like food and drink and work can be and should be enjoyed. This will happen only as we remember that they come from God. One writer warns us, ordinarily we eat and drink simply as fuel to enable us to keep going with our work. Ordinarily, we work not just to earn a living, but to find satisfaction and purpose, and very likely to make a reputation for ourselves and to achieve success. Where is God in all that thinking? Where God is forgotten, joy is elusive. So, remember during these particularly frustrating times, remember God. Thank him before meals. Praise him for getting you through another shift. Confess your foolishness at trying to master life or pretending that you have. And keep in mind these two wonderful verses from Psalm 128. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be happy, and it shall go well with you. Bethesda, today and every day, may we know God's joy in our lives.